Hey, fellow conspirators. It is I, LG Grande, here with you with my great countrified Elvis look. And thank you so much for the positive compliments and responses to Liberty video #1. And I will be making many more in the future. And also, big thanks to Liberty Doll on YouTube. We actually don't live too far from one another. She and her husband just over the line in Massachusetts, as she has mentioned on her videos numerous times. So I have no problem mentioning that. And boy, I got to live stream with her last night. The audience was great. We had so much fun. It was just terrific. And so I wanted to make sure that I came on and created a new video for you as soon as possible. And this is going to be a brief one. And I want to give a big shout out and thumbs up to High Impact Flicks, High Impact Vlogs, Brian Young. He is amazing. He's a voluntarist. He understands the principles of natural rights, freedom, and peace. And I've been watching him for a long time, as I mentioned to Nikki last night, Liberty Doll, on our live stream. And feel free, please head over to her channel as well and check out the live stream, Liberty Doll's channel. And I was low lighting last night, and I think my internet connection was kind of crappy. So hopefully it was a fun conversation and you don't mind occasional glitches or whatever, but I had a great time. But I just want to mention big thumbs up to Brian Young. The guy has been awesome. And this time I am going to be utilizing some of the work that Brian has already done in looking at Donald Trump's press conference yesterday about the vaccine that he's all excited to be getting out someday to America. Now, I'm not going to go into the specifics that many of us know about the lack of efficacy for most vaccines. I'm not going to go into the moral problems of vaccines, many of which are derived from lines that started because of aborted fetuses. I'm not going to go into that stuff or really touch on the forced stuff. I will mention that just a little bit. What I want to do is sort of look at the political economic side of some of the things that Donald Trump said that are just being completely overlooked. And in part that has to do with the Constitution, and in part it goes a little bit deeper and earlier than the Constitution. So I'm going to run through this, and I guess I should just let you know that as I mentioned to Liberty Doll last night, I keep getting these crazy headaches. And right now I do have a little bit of one. So hopefully I'll be sharp and good for you. But I did want to mention that to you. Occasionally I'll probably do some and I won't mention anything, and hopefully you won't be able to tell. But it is kind of strange. It sort of gets me on the left side and stuff. But it's not too bad. So let's roll into this right now. And I will, by the way, mention, don't forget to find us over at BitChute. You'll find all the information a little bit later on. Brian went and did the heavy lifting of taking this hour-plus news conference about vaccines with Donald Trump and, of course, Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx and the whole gang, right? And outside with all the people spaced apart from one another. And Brian culled it to put together some of the pertinent passages about vaccines. And he did a great job. And I just want to point out some of the things here that Brian put together.
In our ongoing effort to rapidly develop and manufacture a coronavirus vaccine, a key feature of our reopening plan is the largest and most ambitious testing system in the world, by far. America is now conducting close to 350,000 tests per day, an unthinkable number just a short while ago. Another essential pillar of our strategy to keep America open is the development of effective treatments and vaccines as quickly as possible. Vanquish the virus, developing the first vaccine candidate. The virus is to develop a vaccine, not even knowing what we were up against. To achieve the fastest ever by far launch of a vaccine trial, this new virus, this very vicious virus. More than 100 potential treatments, more than 130 therapies for active trials. That's what we have right now. And another 450 are in the planning stage. $10 billion to support a medical research effort without parallel. Additional funding.
All right, let's stop right there. Obviously, a lot of this is puffery. This is not only playing up and puffing up the Trump administration, but puffing up America and getting everybody thinking, oh, America can rise to the challenge, and patriotism and nationalism and all that sort of stuff. Okay. But I do want to mention that towards the end of this, Brian also did a fantastic job, because Trump does mention that he doesn't want to force the vaccines on everybody. So let's just hop over here just briefly to wrap that up.
For a full vaccine for everyone that wants to get it. Not everybody's going to want to get it. But we're looking at a full vaccine. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, Will.
Okay, we'll stop it right there, even though it was freeze framing on us. Okay, so what I want to do is discuss one side of this that's really not being, two sides of this that aren't really being mentioned. First of all, none of this is constitutional. There's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that grants any branch of the federal government any power to take on a virus at all, in any way, to develop vaccines, to spend money on vaccines, or anything like that, okay? In addition to that, the U.S. government shouldn't be spending money on things like, tests. That's not part of the Constitution. It's simply not there. Now, there is an amendment process for those people who want to claim that they are constitutionalists. And again, I am more on the Lysander Spooner side. I say, I never signed this. It's not a valid contract for me. But for those people who want to claim that they are constitutionalists, or even people who decide that they're going to vote in the U.S. system, well, those votes, they basically assume that you believe the Constitution is the rule book, because the vote you're applying to some office is based on the creation of the office. So if you're voting, you're assuming to say, well, yes, I agree, the Constitution is the rule book, and my vote will count towards X, Y, or Z person going into the House, the Senate, or to the White House. So that means you are giving your consent to the Constitution, and if that's the case, then you should at least abide by the rules, right? Well, I guess there's some argument as to say whether or not people say that it really is your consent, but I believe if you're voting to put someone in office, then you are saying, yes, I understand these rules, and my vote is part of the system of rules. I think that's pretty clear. So if that's the case, then wouldn't it be an incumbent thing for you to recognize that the rule book doesn't allow for this? Because it doesn't. And there's a deeper facet to this, and that goes towards the very supposed rationale for government, which comes from mainly John Locke's two treatises of government, the second treatise in particular. There is the mighty John Locke. Now, it is assumed that this was written probably around 1679 or so, maybe, before John Locke fled to Holland, because, of course, John Locke was involved with some pretty intense potential revolutionary machinations, and all had to do with the Catholics versus the Protestants at the time in England. So his first treatise is a response to what was called Patriarcha by a guy named Robert Filmer. And that was a defense of the divine right of kings. And Locke said this is ridiculous, that there is no divine right of kings. Locke also adopted some of the ideas of Thomas Aquinas and said you have a right to civilly disobey. And then he went beyond Thomas Aquinas, as I mentioned to Liberty Doll last night, and we were talking about this in her live stream. He went beyond Thomas Aquinas and said, you have the right to violently rebel against a government that is trampling on your natural rights. And then Jefferson took that a step further, because that's intellectual, farther is distance, physical distance. So the Declaration of Independence states explicitly you have a duty to rebel. And that's because, according to Locke, according to Jefferson and Thomas Aquinas, God gave you your rights. And if you didn't rebel, then you would be acting in discord with God's intentions. So this is important stuff to remember. Acting in discord to God's intentions, you would be showing disrespect towards God. So this is important stuff to remember, especially in this case, because if we look at this deeply, philosophically, we can see how far Americans and most Western governments that are at least sort of tied to Lockean natural rights theory have strayed from the original so-called rationale or justification for the existence of the government. And this is a perfect example of it, and there are many others. But according to Locke, people left the so-called state of nature where they were free, but he said there was a risk that they might prey upon each other. I think he misinterprets the state of nature to think that out of the state of nature must come some forced mechanism called government that is going to protect people. But it was his assumption that they couldn't do it in the state of nature. People couldn't voluntarily come up with their own ideas, or maybe he didn't even think of it that way for their own protection, which is the way I believe that people can do that, and they have shown in history that they do that. So Locke missed a lot. But Locke said that people leave the state of nature and they form governments. Again, another assumption on his part that everyone somehow agrees to this, which is ridiculous because you're not going to get unanimity about choosing to create a government, let alone what the government should do or how big or how small or whatever, how it should be elected. It's ridiculous. It's all done through force. Government itself, he says, is there to protect our lives and property against encroachments by other people. Our rights, lives, and property, right? So our right to life, our right to property ownership, right to free association, free speech, that sort of thing. Okay, very, very straightforward. Natural rights, negative reciprocity. You have a right to be left alone by me. I have a right to be left alone by you. Supposedly government is formed to stop us from attacking each other. The problem with Locke, and this is where things start to go off the rails back in the 1670s. The problem with Locke, which the American system adopted, is that Locke assumes that government has to exist to do this, and the quiet, silent wink wink is that in order for government to exist to protect your property, government has to be able to get at your property. So it's a tautology. It's circular. It doesn't work. The logic of Locke's reasoning is not there. It doesn't work. And that problem, that seed is inside the U.S. Constitution and any state apparatus. This blithe assumption that in order to protect you from other people, government has to exist. But government is just other people who now have a statutory legal okay to take your stuff. And it just depends on the type of system you've got, whether it's direct democracy or so-called representative democracy. Now, the United States founders, even though they dropped the Articles of Confederation, and I wish they had not, in writing the Constitution, they took Aristotle's example and they said, okay, we're going to have a set of rules. These are going to be written, these are going to be specific, and if you don't like them, you can amend them. Without amendment, this is how it's supposed to work. So they tried to set up barriers to stop the growth of government from encroaching onto people's natural rights in even more ways than just taking the money from them to supposedly supply them with protection from other people. But the kernel of it is supposedly the rationale for government, according to John Locke, adopted by Jefferson and others, of the small government, in quotes, constitutional side of things, is that governments are formed to protect people from other people. And what you see on the screen here is a president who is in charge of billions of dollars going towards protecting people from a virus, from a natural phenomenon. Now, there is some debate as to whether or not this virus did come from the Wuhan lab. I believe it did. I believe it was given gain to function and that they researched it and created something more intense and more deadly, easily more spreadable at least. And I believe Anthony Fauci was well aware of this, and this is why early on I kept saying, how come Anthony Fauci isn't talking about his association in this research going back to 2014, 2015? I've been talking about that for a couple months. And of course, he's not going to address it, and no reporter from the pop media is going to bother asking him, which is pretty ridiculous. But I think it's extremely important to see just how far the United States system has gone from the original idea of the formation of government. Because now people look at government as being that thing that should protect them from floods, from viruses, from fires, from hurricanes, earthquakes, all sorts of things. And it's become a, well, we're going to get ours before the other state can get theirs situation. So New Hampshire has some bad nor'easter. Oh, it's an emergency. We need money from Washington. Where is that in the Constitution? And what does it show us about how many contemporary Americans feel about why government exists? Because government was not supposed to have been created to protect us from naturally occurring phenomenon. If you're going to go in that direction, then you're opening a Pandora's box. And it just depends on who can describe the naturally occurring phenomenon to the politicians in Washington the best, or give them some sort of feedback for future election, wink wink, to see who will get the grease. And of course, since they're operating in such a massive deficit, it continually leads to them printing up more money or getting the Fed to print up more money and feed their debt instruments, which decreases the buying power of all the money that's already out there and destroys the power of your money to be able to get something with it. And it's an insidious, a very problematic thing. And we're seeing it really manifested right now. I wanted to bring that up. And as an example, I'll turn to one of the really terrific figures in libertarianism, John Stossel. Of course, Stossel worked for ABC News for quite a while, for Fox Business, and now he does videos for Reason. He's got a great educational institution. If you want to get some of the DVDs that he produces, called Stossel in the Classroom. If you have to be, one of those people whose kids are stuck in public schools, maybe put a little pressure on your local school to see if they'll put that out there. Oh, my light's going funky. Let me just check that. There we go, that's better. Okay, so let's watch a little John Stossel here, and he'll give us an example of one of the, well, I think really perfect examples of why the government should not be involved with naturally occurring phenomenon. The technical term for this in economics is moral hazard. This is coming from Liberty Pen, but originally from Stossel.
I was once a parasite. I fed off you. The government encouraged me to be a parasite, and I took the bait.
Years ago, I built this beach house. That's younger me there. The house was on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean. A risky place to build, but I built anyway, 'cause a federal program guaranteed my investment.
Protect your home with flood insurance.
Congress created government flood insurance to help foolish people who don't buy private flood insurance and lose their homes when the water rises. Eventually, a storm swept away my first floor, but I didn't lose a penny. Thanks. I never invited you there, but you paid for my new first floor. Then the whole house went. Government flood insurance covered my loss and many others.
Again, thank you for paying. Now that I'm educated, I have to say I'm sorry, and this is a scam. I won't do it again. Government encourages people to build in dangerous places. If the insurance were left to the private market, insurance companies with their own money on the line would price insurance properly to cover the real risk, and that would discourage foolish risk-taking.
Absolutely right. Good for John Stossel, and openly apologizing. He's a cool guy. I've gotten to meet John Stossel. He's a really, really cool guy. And I asked him a question once. I said, he came to a Free State Project gathering, and I said, John, has your experience in associating with people like Barbara Walters and so on ABC rubbed off a little bit? And he just started to laugh. He goes, no. Implying that, no, she would never be interested in this stuff. That was pretty funny. So let's talk moral hazard very, very, very quickly and give you some info on this. What is a moral hazard? Moral hazard is something that a statutory government agency creates where you see concentrated benefits granted to a particular politically connected entity or a politically favored entity, and you see diffuse costs. So essentially what happens is you see certain people like John Stossel there, they're indemnified by large groups via force, not by insurance companies. And of course, that inspires growing bigger and bigger costs that are, as I said, diffuse and spread through coercion over many people. Now, this applies even to housing, and we'll see with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Fannie Mae created by the Roosevelt administration, Freddie Mac created by the Johnson administration, Fannie Mae for home loans, Freddie Mac for business loans, or business buildings, and the government basically runs the home loan industry now, and the college loan industry. The government basically runs all the college loans. And what has happened is we've seen politicians enter those fields, and they've pushed out the private market, a private market that has to be more careful about risk assessment, cost-benefit analysis, and liability. So it inspires bad actions. And of course, if it's fueled even harder by government-created money, then you'll see something like the housing situation, which I tried to warn people about. I wrote a piece in 2005 for the Mises Institute, and I said, boy, we got bad stuff coming. But there were a handful of people, Peter Schiff, a lot of the libertarian economists from Mises Institute, Foundation for Economic Education, Independent Institute. They were on top of this stuff, but the pop media wasn't listening, and it's really a shame. So this inspires all sorts of resources to be allocated when they shouldn't be allocated, and all of a sudden, at a certain point, people start to realize that prices are going up and the bottom drops out. In this case, with the flood insurance of John Stossel, I'll have to let you know, had a conversation once with a man named Wally Stickney, who is involved with HUD, FEMA, I think, back during the Bush 1 administration. And he told me, yeah, it's a big graft situation, and people game it. So if they live, let's say, near the Red River or something like that, or some other area where they know that it's going to be seasonal flooding, or there'll be flooding that comes every few years or so, they literally, he said, move their old furniture down to the lower level. Then they write it off and they get it replaced, and they don't have to buy it themselves because the federal government buys it. So it's extremely important, I think, to keep this sort of thing in mind when we look at Donald Trump and vaccines. And I won't talk about the vaccine court. If you want some conversation about that, I'll refer you to Liberty Doll's live stream that we did together last night. That would be from the 15th of May. And I won't talk about forced vaccinations per se. I will say this, however, the federal government has played very cozy with vaccine makers and the pharmaceutical industry, and they have essentially made it very difficult to recoup any sort of damages from the vaccine makers. And hats off to Del Bigtree and many others, the people behind Vaxxed and Vaxxed2. They have done great jobs looking at the adjuvants in these things and trying to find out whether they cause real bad damage to many people, particularly kids. So I can go into more of that later, but I do want to bring this up to you, that news conference from Donald Trump really signifies something important to remember, not just about the things that are happening today with Cowabunga 19 and the vaccination worries and forced vaccinations, anything like that, but also about the very premise of government. And I'll leave you with this. It eventually leads to, maybe not forced vaccines this time, but a lot of problems with natural rights. Because Washington State, and this is back from April, and now I heard on David Knight's program, they have gotten the locations and they've paid for them. They have fairgrounds in Washington State where they plan on taking people who are infected with the you-know-what and putting them there. And there is some discussion that if it comes down to mandatory testing and anyone resists mandatory testing, they'll put them there as well. Unbelievable. So natural rights are not being protected when there is the creation of the state. And unfortunately, as government has grown over time, more and more people don't even think about the original concept of the formation of government, which is to protect your property and your lives and your livelihoods from others. Because, of course, the government, in order to exist, infringes on your property and your ability to control your own life. And it just grows. So now They think that government should be involved in protecting people against naturally occurring phenomenon like a pathogen, a virus. And it leads to potentially even more restrictions on your rights. Hey, thanks so much for watching, everybody. Don't forget, like and subscribe if you get the opportunity. I'll see you over on Twitter. The information's out there. Hit us up on BitChute as well. And again, big thanks to Liberty Doll and everybody who joined me on her show. That was awesome. And yes, I'll tell people a little bit more about my fiction in future production. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much. Be seeing you.